Hi, thanks for joining us. I'm Rachel Vindman, and this is the Suburban Women Problem, a weekly podcast from Red, Wine, and Blue. It's pretty obvious the GOP has a suburban women problem, and we're here to talk about it. You can learn more at pod.redwine.blue, and you can listen to the full pod by searching for the Suburban Women Problem wherever you get your podcasts. This week, I'm talking to Lily Franklin, who's running for delegate in Virginia's new 41st district. Hi, Lily. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
There are a lot of important elections across the country this year, but things are especially high stakes in Virginia. So I'd love to start by asking you why this upcoming election is so important in Virginia.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have been looking at Virginia to see what happens. I think when Glenn Youngkin won in 2021, a lot of people were upset and confused as what was happening here. But I think this year the stakes in Virginia are just even higher since we've already seen what is happening across the nation since the Dobbs decision last year. I mean, Virginia is the last state in the South that is still allows abortion and reproductive health care. And so that's at stake. I think public education is another one. We've heard from a number of Republican opponents that are looking at different measures that would practically defund public education here in Virginia. And so I, I think there are just so many important issues this year on the line, but those would definitely be the top two.
Abortion is really what's on the ballot in so many ways in Virginia. Reproductive rights, I should say, but really is what's on the ballot in Virginia because Governor Youngkin has been very open that if he gets both houses of the Virginia Assembly, he plans on restricting reproductive rights first thing. And yeah, so I think that, that's kind of the subtext of what you're voting on, but there are a lot of other factors at play. I lived in Virginia in 2021 when Glenn Youngkin won his race for governor, and he did the whole focusing on education and parents' rights. And since then, he's just continued to do it to push an extremist Virginia. What is at stake with public education in Virginia this year with this election?
Yeah, so I'm a former teacher. I taught high school geometry. When I first started, I also, after that, I worked for Delegate Sam Rasul in the legislature. So
Mhm.
I saw how it was as a teacher and then transitioned to what happened in the state government, and I'll never forget, going into the General Assembly for the first time and seeing that we could go into the supply closet as legislative staff and get whatever we needed. It was essentially just a taxpayer funded Staples. I could get anything I needed, no questions asked. And then I think back to when I was a teacher and I had to fight for the markers I needed to use on the whiteboard. And I was a math teacher, so that meant I was writing quite a bit on the whiteboard. And so for me, it's really about equity and distribution of resources. We're talking about Virginia's budget here. Last year, we had a $5 billion surplus, and that's billion with a B. And so we have the resources here in Virginia to
Mhm.
create a world education system. We just have to make that choice. And I think what we've seen is that there's a lot of entities that don't want to invest in public education, and our kids are affected by that. Our
Mhm.
students, our teachers, and our parents. And so until we start prioritizing education, we are going to continue to leave people behind.
I could not agree more. You very well said on your part. And I think that's maybe part of the problem when you elect someone who is a private equity guru. That's great that he delivered for his investors, but that's not what government is. So having a $5 billion surplus does no one any good. He is only using it for political purposes to further Glenn Youngkin. And we can just expect more of that if we continue to elect people who do not care about the people they are representing and governing. I love that you were a teacher. You worked for Teach for America, as I understand, correct?
Mhm, correct. I was.
That's so exciting. What a great program that is. What has been your perspective, bringing that perspective and the importance? I mean, you shared some of that already, but as someone who's been in the classroom, what would you like to see happened in Richmond that is not happening right now?
I think we have seen a lot of entities trying to push politics into the classroom. And when we
Mm,
do that, everyone suffers, the kids, the
yeah.
parents, the teachers. I mean, I was a math teacher, as I said earlier, and most days I struggled to get my students to understand the Pythagorean theorem and things along those lines. I couldn't even thought.
Guilty.
Exactly. I mean, I was, I couldn't have even pushed a political agenda even if I wanted to. And so, at the end of the day, as a teacher, I realized that when my parents were involved, when the community members were involved, when we had resources around these students, our students thrived. And the fact of the matter is, most parents in my district and many places across Virginia are working 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet.
Hmm.
And so,
Hmm.
when we are right now enacting a lot of piecemeal legislation, but at the end of the day, we're not really solving any of the problems in schools. And so we have to make sure we close critical funding gaps, and that we continue to fight for resources for schools instead of where we see a lot of people wanting to pull those resources out of schools.
Yeah. So we also talked about abortion and reproductive rights. In Ohio, it's literally on the ballot. I think in Virginia, it's like kind of the subtext, but it's still on the ballot. With that being said, I don't know that all voters are completely informed on this. If they, sort of understand that, Glenn Youngkin really wants to push a 15-week ban on abortion. What are you hearing from your constituents about this, or the people, I guess you hope to be your constituents, the people who will be voting for you? What are you hearing?
This is definitely a priority for the people in my district. So I'm in Southwest Virginia, so definitely a
Hmm.
more rural, suburban area of Virginia.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, when they saw this district, they thought that this might not be a priority, but people care about this. I mean, I talked to a lot of women who are older and maybe a little bit more conservative, but they remember what it was like in a pre-Roe era. They remember their friends
Hmm.
dying of sepsis. And while this isn't related exactly to Roe, they remember that they had to ask their husband's permission for birth control. And there's just a
Yeah.
lot of women who don't want to go backwards. And so this is a
Hmm.
priority for them. I also like to point out that the 41st district is basically the front lines for this battle of reproductive health care. In this region sits the westernmost Planned Parenthood facility that's located in Roanoke. And people have been having to drive all across the South in order to get to this facility. Back in May, they said 28% of their clientele have to cross state lines in order to seek services. And so,
Wow.
yeah, I mean, coming all the way from Mississippi, Kentucky, Tennessee, all of the surrounding areas, because it's the closest Planned Parenthood, and it's a
Hmm.
well-trusted brand. And so people know that they're going to get
Yeah. Yeah.
services. And, and since then, they've only become more overwhelmed in their need for more people coming
Hmm.
across. And so keeping Virginia open is the same as keeping a beacon of hope for these young women
Hmm.
that have to come into
Hmm.
our district. And so we just have to make sure that we remember that not only are we fighting for Virginia and the 4 million women that live here, but for the 32 million women that are in the South as well. So.
Wow. That's a That's a lot to shoulder, a big burden. And I appreciate that sharing that story, because I think it's really important that we talk about it a lot on the podcast, and we just, talk about it in general. But the the number of women who do not have access to reproductive health care, and there's still a need, and they will try to seek it other places, but it's still encroaching. Can you imagine driving Mississippi to Virginia to get the health care that you need? And that's the closest place you can go. And trying to further restrict it. And we know that whenever you put those parameters, those boundaries, when that a lot of people can't afford to go, or they don't know how to go. I mean, there's a lot of issues in play there that will prevent people from getting the care they need. But we have definitely not minimized the need. We've just minimized the access, and it's a huge tragedy. I hope that the women and the voters of Virginia, at least, until we can come up with a more permanent solution, keep that clinic and that possibility alive.
Yeah, and I just think that we see also with more restrictions, we're seeing a lot more doctors wanting to leave the field, and in this district, there is a year-long wait list to get in to see an OBGYN. And so that I mean, we can't have people leaving these rural localities. There's still other services that are preventative in nature that women need as well.
No, absolutely. Yeah, when I was reading your campaign page and about you, I was really struck by kind of the letter that you wrote and talking about really wanting to take care of the constituents of the 41st district from all aspects of life. And I thought that was really great. We talk about paid family and medical leave a lot on this podcast, but can you speak more to a family friendly economy and why that is such a priority for you?
Yeah, so I grew up in a working class family. I watched my parents struggle to make ends meet while they dealt with complex substance abuse disorders. I worked several jobs to pay my way through college. I mean, I'm currently working 3 jobs. And so these experiences really gave me the framework on how I approach everything from education to healthcare to taxes. For me, specifically on the family friendly economy, I think that we need to be doing more in understanding how the policies we enact affect families in the area. And if we want Virginia to be a place that people want to raise a family, then we need to be thinking about what does it mean to succeed as a child? What does it mean to succeed as a working family? What does it mean to retire with dignity? And I think part of that is just from the struggles that I dealt with. I felt like there were so many cracks in the system, but also I think it's because I have a long-term generations of my family living here. My brother just had twins, him and his fiance, and then my grandparents who are in their 90s. And so we all live in this region. And so I really want to think about a full process of what it really means to thrive and make sure that families have the tools that they need.
I love that. And I have to say, what we hear so much is that people feel left behind. They feel that they can't. One of the things that struck me is, being able to stay in the area where they want to live, but have a good paying job. And that is critical. I think that is critical in so many rural places in the United States. And I love that you are addressing it. I don't hear many politicians address it. I think because it's a very complicated issue and they're afraid to talk about it because it's going to open maybe a can of worms. But I love that you are, and this is really the future, I think, of progressives in the United States. And if we're ever going to solve problems, first we have to acknowledge them and talk about them. So I think it's absolutely fabulous. Why is it important for young women like yourself to run for office?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of factors in play. One of the important things that we always talk about is you can't be what you can't see. If
Mm.
I'm elected, I'd be the first Democratic woman representing Southwest Virginia in my lifetime. One of the local news organizations actually just published a story about this, that Southwest Virginia used to lead the way in electing women, but over the past couple of decades, we've fallen behind. And there's actually 2 other women that are running in the Senate on the Democratic ballot that are running to be the first woman of color to represent Southwest Virginia, and their districts overlap with mine. And so I think part of it is that if you don't see that this is a possibility, then it's something that would hold you back in wanting to run. But I also think that in a district like mine, it's important because I have a college campus. And so there's a lot of young people thinking about what their future is going to look like. And for them to see that young women are able to run for office and succeed in whatever that means, it will encourage more women to want to get involved in the process.
Very well said. What's something that you'd like to tell our listeners who aren't in Virginia? Are there any lessons that you've learned that can be applied in other states or to elections in other states?
I think the biggest one is to not count out your rural areas. What we saw in 2021 here in Virginia is a divestment in rural Virginia, and it allowed the GOP to run up numbers in the rural places. And unfortunately, our liberal centers couldn't hold the state blue because of that. And so, when I'm out knocking doors right now, I'm going down back roads, they're gravel roads. It's the first time that voter has ever experienced anyone that would knock on their door. And what I find is that they not only wanted somebody to hear them, and after I've listened to them, they're supporting me, but we're also bringing someone into the fold. And so that voter that votes for me this year is going to be voting for Senator Tim Kaine next year, and Joe Biden, and then whoever's our governor candidate in the future. And so if we really want to close the margins across the United States, we really need to make sure we're fighting in all zip codes. And I think that's probably been my top takeaway.
I love it. Well, it's been really great talking to you today, and I'm so glad that you joined us. But before we let you go, where can listeners go to find out more about you and your campaign?
So they can go online to our website at lilyfordelegate.com, and that's LILYFOR delegate.com. And you can find out all ways you can get involved and learn more about the story and what we're doing down here in the 41st.
Well, you have a really user-friendly website. I love that it's like so clear. I wish all campaigns did it like that, because it's like you can order a sign, you can host an event. It's just all your choices, and it's a really great site. But Lily, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been a pleasure talking to you.
Oh, thanks for having me. I really appreciate you taking time to interview me and learn more about this district and fighting here in Virginia.